In today's lesson, we're going to take what you learned in the last lesson about aperture and depth of field and put it to work. What we're going to do today is create a shallow depth of field. And this is a really cool effect that it really pays dividends, or it shows why you might want to have a lot of control over your camera that auto mode just won't get you. We talked in the last episode about aperture and how it controls depth of field. And so that, unsurprisingly, is what we're going to be working with today. You're going to find that you can use this in a lot of different contexts, and it's really cool. You'll use it all the time in portraits and pictures of people. You'll use it all the time when you're taking pictures of flowers and stuff like that. Really anything where there's a definite subject that you really want to sort of pop or leap out of the photo and then have this nice blurred background that's unimportant. And in fact, the blurriness then eliminates distractions that could detract from the focus on your subject, which is what you want. So that's what we're going to do. Now, we've talked about our exposure controls, and we talked in each of them how there's always a trade-off. In the case of aperture, the trade-off is that as you open the aperture to let more light in, then you get a shallower depth of field. And in order to create this deeper depth of field where everything is sharp in your photo, well, then now you're making your aperture smaller, and so it's costing you light, okay? That's the normal problem. The good news for us today is that we're in the opposite position, aren't we? We actually want the shallow depth of field. So we want this wide open aperture, and that's letting a lot of light in. So we really get our cake and eat it too. We're getting the increased exposure from the wide open aperture, and we're getting the shallow depth of field effect that we were after. We don't want everything sharp in the picture. We only want our subject or focal point to be sharp. I see all the time in dealing with aperture and depth of field, people that simply open up their aperture all the way to the smallest f number. Remember, the smallest f number gets you your largest aperture, which gets you your shallow depth of field. But there's more to it than that. If you simply do that and nothing else, then I can't guarantee that you're going to get this shallow depth of field that you're after. And a lot of times that doesn't work out for them. There's problems. So what I want to give you are 3 keys to success. And if you do these things, in addition to using the large aperture, then I can guarantee that you're going to get a shallow depth of field. So here's what I want you to do. Obviously, use your largest aperture here, your smallest f number. But then the 3 things are as follows. First, make sure you put some distance between your subject, which you're focusing on, and your background. Remember that what we're dealing with in depth of field is fall off from in focus to out of focus. So the more room we allow for that to happen, the more things will fall off to out of focus. If you put something right next to your subject or your focal point, it's going to be reasonably sharp too. You've got to have some space for this to work, because remember, it's just about how fast or slow do things fall off to out of focus, and it's just not instantaneous. So be sure you give yourself some room. The second thing you want to do is get close to your subject. So get as close as you can, and then that way, when you set your focal point on that subject or that thing or that plant or whatever it is, then your focal point will be close to you, and then the background, which again you set far away, there's a lot of room for it to fall off. In other words, if you set your subject far away, the camera's going to have a harder time than creating that fall off that you want. The third thing you need to do is zoom in to the extent possible. So get a good tight composition around your subject as close as you can, and that's going to really help you create a shallow depth of field. So try those 3 things and you're going to have success with this, I promise. Now, the last thing I said about zooming in, though, is going to lead to problems for some people, so I did want to address that. A lot of you are going to have what's called a variable aperture lens. This is very common on cameras, and if your camera came with a lens, then it's very likely that you're going to run into this. In fact, for Canon and Nikon cameras, many come with an 18 to 55 millimeter lens, and you're going to see on it, it's going to say f3.5 through 5.6. That's telling you the maximum aperture. So in the case of those lenses, the maximum aperture is a 3.5 through a 5.6. So why is it different? Remember that when we talk about aperture, the measurement is actually two things. It's the size of the aperture as it relates to your focal length, okay? So as you change your focal length, you're changing the aperture measurement. You're not changing the size of the aperture, but you are changing the measurement. The key thing for you to remember is this, is that as you zoom in with this lens, because remember it's an 18 to 55, so you can zoom in, through 20 and 30 millimeters and 40 and on up to 55 millimeters. And as you do it, let's say you set your lens initially at f3.5. As you zoom in, you're going to watch that go up. And by the time you're all the way zoomed in, it's going to be at f5.6. You didn't change your aperture, it just went, the number got larger. Remember that the size of the aperture didn't change. It was just the focal length that changed, and that changed the measurement. But you are going to see that happen, so I did want to alert you to that. That leads to the final thing I wanted to talk about with respect to aperture and getting a shallow depth of field, which is a little trick for you that you might want to try, because fast lenses cost a lot of money. Zoom lenses, the fastest you'll ever see is f2.8, and those are usually the most expensive zoom lenses. You can get prime lenses that go a little faster, but that gets really pricey really quick. We all know lenses are expensive to begin with, and once you start getting into high end, you're talking serious dollars. So we don't want that though, but we do want a fast lens so that we can get this nice shallow depth of field. So what do? Well, I have one suggestion for you, sort of a trick, which is a 50 millimeter lens, 50 millimeter 1.8 lens, or f1.8 lens to be precise. I have here a Canon version, but Nikon makes them. I'm pretty sure Sony makes them. And not only that, but I think that there are companies, third-party companies, that make them as well, and they're even cheaper. So I should mention the price, because that is really the deal here. I believe these lenses are about $125, and that's for Canon, Nikon, and Sony, I believe. When's the last time you bought a lens for $125? I mean, these are really cheap, and if you get the third-party ones, they're even cheaper. Keep in mind, this lens has a max aperture of f1.8. That is really wide. That is really fast. So you can be in the game of getting really shallow depths of field with a lens that only costs $100, or maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but somewhere thereabouts. So this is something you might want to consider. Now, you may ask yourself, why is this so cheap when other lenses cost so much money? And part of the reason has to do with it being a 50 millimeter, and they've been making these things for a million years. But the other part of it has to do with, you'll see when you get your lens, these things just feel really cheap. They're just little plasticky things, and they feel like they're about to fall apart on you. But I can tell you, I've had mine for, I don't know, more than 5 years, maybe 10 years, I'm not quite sure. And it still works just fine, no problems whatsoever, and I never really hear of anybody having problems with these. So this is a really nice thing to have if you are a person that's going to want to play with shallow depths of field and you think that might be something you do a lot in your photography. So check these out. Anyway, that leads us now to our assignment. Unsurprisingly, probably, I want you to go capture pictures with shallow depths of field. My suggestion to you is that you go do a flower shot. These work really well, and people always seem to enjoy flower shots and working with those, because they make you be really precise with your focus, and they're great ones that really present well with shallow depths of field. So you can make that flower sort of pop off a totally blurred background, and it actually looks really cool. So go ahead and give that a try. Remember to use not only your largest aperture, which will be the smallest f number, remember, but to use my 3 keys to success too, which is give yourself some distance between your subject and the background, move your subject if you have to, or move yourself so that you have some distance between your subject and the background. Get close to your subject so you're drawing your focus point closer, and then zoom in to the extent possible as well. If you do those things, I guarantee success. Anyway, good luck with the assignment. Have fun with it. Then when you're done, come back. We'll continue talking about aperture, but this time we'll talk about it in the opposite way, and that is getting deep depths of field.